Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study and the beginning, the book of Genesis. Today we'll be talking about lesson 27 of our study, which covers the book of Genesis, chapters 46 and 47. Several things happen in this lesson, kind of disconnected things. Jacob goes to Egypt, but on the way he stops by Beersheba and has a chat with God, which is relevant and important, right? That's who Jacob is. He wants to see his son. This all seems good, but he's not leaving behind the land of Canaan without going back to the first place he encountered God and having a chat again. And God says, "Oh, don't worry about it. That's what I have in mind. You should totally go to Egypt, and I'll make of you a great nation." And that's the first real big emphasis on this idea of nationhood for these people. And you're not going to stay there, so don't worry too much about it. This is still the promised land. That's not the promised land, but you should go. Then we get a different kind of genealogy. The ones we've been seeing are, we're not going to worry about these people anymore. This is what Israel looks like, the people of Israel look like going to Egypt, right? We're taking a snapshot of, they're going to Egypt, here's our inventory, here's where we're at when we go to Egypt. These are the people who are going to be relevant. So this is different kind of genealogy, but an important one, but not one that we need to dwell excessively long on, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we get into it. There are one or two things that are interesting, but by and large, we're just taking inventory at this point in time. And there is a tree showing a lot of this on page 149 in the lesson, if you want a visual representation of it, which honestly is probably better than a giant wall of text. But important that it's there, not important that we dig into it too much. Jacob meets Pharaoh, and they have a conversation where Jacob complains that his life is shorter than his predecessors and has been hard the whole time. Both things that are true, but he seems generally okay now. He's just kind of a crotchety old guy at this point, and he is old. By any current standards, still quite old. But they meet, at least, the main important figures in Jacob's life, or in Joseph's life. And then we have, past that, we have more of Joseph being clever, right? Joseph and Pharaoh have all of the food, like in the known world. And what are they going to do with all of that? Give it away generously to everyone else? That is not the plan. What the plan is to leverage that, and what they ultimately end up doing is leveraging that to take all of the money and herds and ultimately freedom of all of the people in Egypt. They managed to enslave the entire nation of Egypt in an arrangement where it's not slavery like we did it in this country, but it's a thing where they're all indentured and pay a significant portion of any future earnings to Pharaoh. And that is accomplished because of Joseph's planning around this known famine and how he's managing the resources. And they do it in such a way that the people are even grateful for it because they have food to eat. So Joseph, I guess, outsmarts all of the nation of Egypt along the way, except the priests have enough of a stipend for being priests that they're exempt, but everybody else has to bargain for food, and in so doing gives up anything Joseph wants, basically. And that gets us settled into Egypt, and those are kind of our key points. High level and broader significance, the thing that matters is this time sojourning in Egypt, I think. Right? This is a big deal in the history of these people. It is the thing that God had in mind and chose to do. And there are a lot of lengthy and complex reasons for that are beyond the scope here. But worth noting, God promised these people a land to dwell in that they could call their own. And then very explicitly didn't let them be just there. He didn't want them to be too comfortable or too settled in any one place when they were forming their identity as a people. He also didn't want them to feel entirely autonomous and like they could count on themselves, right? What we set up is a deeply ingrained in the history of this people idea of being travelers and of having been enslaved and oppressed. That becomes an essential part of this people's identity and how they do things moving forward. They can't come to have a place of their own until they have had that experience. You can't appreciate freedom unless you've been enslaved. This is not just these people, right? This is the human condition. This is a commentary on the question, why would God allow humanity to have free will? Why is the fall of humanity a thing that had to happen, right? It's the same sort of question. Why would God send his people to Egypt to be enslaved? Why would he let all of us people here on earth, why would he send us out of the garden to toil and struggle and be enslaved also to sin and to death, right? It's the same thing, but we can't, and it's the same answer, right? Like, we were in the garden, we were in the land that was promised to us by God without carefree, and we didn't have the means to appreciate it. A snake comes along and says that apple looks nice, and next thing you know, that's what happens when you haven't earned it, right? When you haven't struggled and worked for it, is by nature of who we are, we didn't appreciate it, and we couldn't hold on to it, and it didn't have the same ascribed value to us because we hadn't worked for it, which I know is kind of dumb, and because humans are kind of dumb, and not every person would have had that view, right? Mary, the mother of God, was also put in a place where she was basically in the garden from her conception, and she treasured and cherished what she was given and didn't blow it, right? There are people who are fine, but overall, and way better than fine, but overall human condition, if you just plopped all these people in Canaan and said, we're just going to give it to you without any struggle and enjoy being there, they're going to feel entitled to it, right? And like it's theirs and they earned it. Whereas if they've been enslaved and God brings them back, then it's God gave us this land and delivered us from slavery. And it's because of God that we're here, which was true either way. But the lesson sinks in a lot better this way. So too for us, right? We're being called by virtue of our creation and the faculties we're given as human beings. We are called to love God and to serve God. That takes love in this sense is absolutely not a feeling, though it can have feelings come with it, right? It is a choice. It is a choice that must constantly be made and reaffirmed. That takes a certain mindset to be able to do, right? Because it's not always going to feel good or make sense, right? It's the thing we have to be locked into to want to try to do. And for that to happen, it is helpful to have the perspective of what has God done for us and to see the alternatives, right? And so we are, for a time, humanity, slaves, and we have been delivered in Jesus Christ. And we can, from that, choose to continue to live in freedom, or we can choose to go back to slavery. It's by nature of how we work as humans, it is helpful that we went through the bad times that help to reframe and shape how we view our place in the world. And it was helpful for the identity of these people that it happened here as well. So God brings his people to Egypt. He does it initially very auspiciously, but ultimately this is to ingrain certain core things on their identity as a people, and is an essential part of creating the nation of Israel. Here we see how Jacob thinks. We haven't seen much of Jacob for a while, and what we saw was, no, don't take Benjamin. And it's easy to forget that this is a guy who had a profound relationship with God that also affected everything he did in his life after his original encounter with God at Beersheba. And that's where he goes back now. He's not just rushing to see his son. He is saying, what is going on here? And how do we feel about that, God? He's also understanding his age, probably thinking he's not coming back. And so wants to one more time go to the place where his relationship with God began. And he does. And he has a conversation with God. And God says, don't worry about going down to Egypt. I'll send you there and I'll bring you back again, and Joseph's hands will close your eyes. And this is all for the good. But Jacob does not leave without saying goodbye to God and making sure that God is okay with the fact that he's leaving. Because it is the promised land, right? How can you, the patriarch, leave the land that God promised you and your people? And he may have had that question. But his life is guided by what God wants him to do. Even now, even at the faced with the prospect of reuniting with his long-lost son, he takes a stop along the way and makes sure that everything is as God wants it. That would not be easy to do, and shows where Jacob's priorities are. We are so very far away from the guy who stole his brother's blessing. This is not selfish behavior at all, right? This is entirely interested in what does God want. Radically transformed guy. It's also worth noting he's called both Jacob and Israel here. We've already talked about that can go back and forth even in the midst of one passage, and here it does. We do also see, and this is really important because it changes when we transition into Exodus, where we almost are. Who is God right now to these people? This is still an individual personal relationship, right? Like, Jacob sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God introduces himself as the God of your father. That's silly because obviously he's also the God of Jacob now. And when it's listed, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. But right now, it's the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. It's an interesting thing that Jacob, being still alive at this point in time, doesn't make the list. It's the dead ones who make the list. Although later it comes up and Jesus makes the point that God is the God of the living and not of the dead. Right now, the identity of God is being attributed to his relationship with dead people. Jacob is nearly dead and has a better relationship with God than Isaac ever did. But we're talking about it being the God of Isaac right now. But after Jacob's passing, it will be the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And that is for a while in their captivity how these people view God. And that is a problem, right? Because he is a God of dead guys who aren't there and not a God of living people. And, you know, we kind of romanticize that whole God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob thing. That was a mistake. That should not have been how they viewed that. And it shouldn't be how we view that. If he's a God of dead guys and of like an individual guy, then what does that mean for me, right? He's not a God of the dead. He's a God of the living. And Moses helps the people reframe how they viewed the identity of God. And that relationship is no longer, he's not the God of Moses when Moses is alive or when Moses is dead. That's not, it's reframed and it's reestablished. You have a people and they have a God, and it's a live and active relationship. But that's a story for another book, and it takes a long time for Moses to change the people's thinking on this matter. It gets ingrained. But here, we see it's already starting to be ingrained, right? There's this view of God as the God of the dead right now that just kind of subtly works in there, but it's interesting and worth a little bit of comment. Anyway, Jacob is going to Egypt. And here we have our genealogy. And again, this is not the people that aren't relevant anymore. This one and only this one is really in Genesis this is who we do care about, right? This is who's left. This is our remnant. This is the foundation upon which the nation that we're looking forward to is built. And so we look at the children of Israel and we name their wives as we're starting into this. The one thing that I will call out that becomes relevant yet in the book of Genesis that is introduced here is that Joseph has two sons by the name of Ephraim and Manasseh. Or Manasseh and Ephraim is the birth order. And it's the daughter of an Egyptian priest is their mother. But we have Joseph's two sons become more relevant than the rest of these descendants. So mentioning it here because this is where they're introduced, and they'll come back around in the last lesson. Now that we've established Judah can be trusted, he is the emissary sent to interact with Joseph, because those two seem to get along for pretty apparent reasons now. We're pretty sure Judah is going to be safe in Joseph's presence, which I think we're not worried about anymore, but if we're being really safe, let's send him. Maybe let's not send Simeon, for example, or Reuben. And for that matter, Levi, right? If we're going down the order, then we're at the point of this is the oldest one that we can trust to do this, which is also relevant, but less so in Genesis and more so beyond. But case anybody doesn't know, Jesus is in the line of Judah, right? Just so we're all tracking that. But anyway, Judah goes on ahead, and they meet at Goshen, which is that's where you want to live in Egypt, right? That's good, wealthy, fertile land. This is a good place, and this is where they're trying to settle. And we'll see, even in that regard, Joseph is not above being clever and working things to the outcome that he has in mind. Following Judah, Israel, Jacob, also makes it to Goshen and is reunited with his son Joseph, and is basically says, okay, my life is complete now. I can die now. I'm reunited with my son. I'm good. This is great. And the two are reunited. And Joseph has another plan, which is the people of Egypt don't much care for shepherds, and I guess there's a reason for shepherds to have to be in Goshen and away from the rest of the people in this prime spot. The analysis of real estate markets at the time is definitely past where we're at now, but we're going to take Joseph's word for this idea, right? That if they're shepherds, they can't be too intermingled with the Egyptians, because that's not a good thing, and that necessitates that they should live in Goshen. Why Goshen was relatively unoccupied and that was okay, we don't get from the context, right? But we can take it as given that that's how that would go. Joseph thinks that's how that will go. That is how that goes. And that is a desirable outcome to Joseph. It's also not a lie, right? They do tend and care for flocks. That is the family business. So we're just Joseph's just giving it a little nudge to make sure that the right thing happens, but it's generally what should have happened anyway. He's just, getting his ducks in a row to just a little nudge, just to make sure. And Joseph seems to think that it would be good for his family to settle in Goshen. And again, he would know. So all good. Just Joseph, again, pulling a couple strings to make sure things go the way he wants them to. And then Joseph and a few selected brothers go to meet Pharaoh, and they do what Joseph said, and things happen the way that he said they would. There is, even in how he introduces it, he says, my father and my brother with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, right? Like, he's really leaning into it. And then the brothers have been instructed to say, yeah, we're shepherds and we tend sheep and our family tends flocks. And Pharaoh says, oh yeah, then you have to go to Goshen, right? Like, just more evidence of who Joseph is. And we see where the people are going to settle. And that's that. Then an interesting thing happens, which is Jacob meets Pharaoh. And a more interesting thing happens. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Who's the greater one of these two guys? You would think Pharaoh, but you would also think that the greater would bless the lesser. For context, see God / the angel blessing Jacob. And other things with Abraham earlier in the book when he's relating to other kings as well, right? The greater does bless the lesser. Jacob blessing Pharaoh tells you something about their rank that is unexpected. Why is that their rank? Because of God, right? Like, God has that relationship with Jacob, and Pharaoh does not have that relationship with God. And Joseph is such a blessing to the land of Egypt. Who has more of a claim to Joseph, Pharaoh or Jacob? Especially, what is it about Joseph that has been such a blessing to the land of Egypt? It is the blessing, right, that comes from God. And where does that come from for Joseph? From Jacob and from God, right? There is all of the good things happening in the land of Egypt that are making it blessed and unique right now are because of Joseph and are because of God, and therefore are also because of Jacob. It is an interesting power dynamic that Pharaoh doesn't contest or argue against either, right? This is, and then they have amidst the blessing, they have a brief chat of, Jacob, how old are you? And we get a chance to see how old Jacob is, and he says, not as old as my fathers were, and it hasn't been all super fun, but they're settling. And the really interesting thing here is that Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Now we see what I think is our last example of Joseph being clever in the book of Genesis, because we're almost done with the book of Genesis. But this is also a good one. Who has all the food? Joseph has all the food. Pharaoh does, but Joseph is administering it. Who needs the food? Everybody, because it's a famine, right? So Joseph has pretty close to an infinite amount of leverage. If he doesn't give people the food, they will die. So really, anything that they could give up short of their lives to get the food is better than not getting food. That is the leverage that Joseph has. And so with that, he first extracts from all of the people of Egypt their money, and then he extracts their cattle in exchange for food. He's more than happy to give food out to people, but he is doing it at a price. And he is taking, at this point, he has taken all of their valuable possessions, more or less, in exchange for food and life. So that's a good start, but we know it's a long famine. I'll be curious to see where it goes from here. So ultimately, the people give their money, then they give their cattle, then they're still hungry. And they come and say, now what? We're still hungry. And Joseph says, well, I have a great idea. You can just be slaves of Pharaoh, and you can have all the food you want. Wouldn't that be nice to be able to keep eating? And the people's point is, we don't have any choice, right? We need to eat. It's better than being dead. And so all the people of Egypt, effectively, almost all, we'll get to it shortly, enter into servitude to Pharaoh. It's worth noting that this enslavement thing is, or servitude thing is, basically they give their land and then they have to work on land owned by Pharaoh. This isn't like, again, like American slavery where they have absolutely no freedom or autonomy. It's they give up their ownership of the land, and so they're working for Pharaoh. And Pharaoh gets proceeds. It is a different kind of slavery than what we think of, but it is, they no longer own and control any of the means of production, right? And are working as essentially employees of Pharaoh on land owned by Pharaoh, instead of as employees of themselves on land owned by themselves. Only the priests are exempt from this because they already, being priests, get a stipend from Pharaoh that is sufficient to live, so they don't have to make the same bargain. everyone else does. And then Joseph has the handy idea of, here's some seed, you all can now plant it on our land, and you can just give 20% back, and the rest is yours. And the people say, this is great, thank you, we love you, Joseph, because they appreciate not starving to death. So it seems like a situation that is beneficial for everyone, and it is a situation that's beneficial for everyone, but it is most beneficial for Pharaoh, and Joseph has made that happen. You think Pharaoh might be willing to give up Goshen to Joseph and his brothers in exchange for all of the land of Egypt? I think Pharaoh is still real happy with his relationship with this guy, right? This is going well. And again, Joseph has saved all these people's lives. Like, they're not wrong to be grateful, right? If he hadn't showed up and said, I know what those dreams mean and what to do about them, they'd have all starved to death anyway, right? This is a net win for everybody involved. It really is. So think what you will about the whole slavery thing, and did they have to do that? No. Could they have just given out the food? Yes. Did they? Clearly not. But still, net positive for everybody. And then we see the end of Jacob's life at 147. So he gets to live some time in Egypt, even after the famine, with Joseph and with his family. He's 17 years in Egypt after all of that he gets to enjoy with his family reunited and without having to worry about hunger or anything. And when he knows his time is near, he calls Joseph and says, I want to be buried with my fathers, not here. And he binds him to it in a form of promise that doesn't make any sense to us, so let's not worry about it. But Joseph is supposed to promise, and he does, and Jacob dies. But we're going to go back and see a little bit more with Jacob still, but that's an end of Jacob. This has been an overview of Lesson 27 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.